It'll take you to the website that'll actually allow you to register there, and Kay will drop a little discount code in the chat again for you guys because you're on the call today. But yeah, everybody needs to mute. Somebody's not muted, making everybody else crazy. So yeah, there you go. Thank you. Well, there's the code, work on it, that's in the chat. And so if you grab that, I think it's like $50 off of the cost. And if you're a golfer and you're like interested in doing that, you need to get in right now because we were crazy. We had 12 spots, then we had 16, then we had 24. Now we have 28 spots, and I think there's like 3 spots left. So that's going to be a blast. But we've also got the Bellagio pool. We rented a cabana for you guys to enjoy, like a huge cabana. Or if you just want to come and Friday just hang out. It's really for executive level. So we leave that a little bit loose for you. But right now, the Think Tank Live is not for all staff. It's really designed for people that are going to be in the room that are decision makers, executive team, lead pastors, executive pastors, that sort of thing would be the ideal audience. And so we've got some lead guys who are coming alongside their executive guys and vice versa. So if that helps you kind of make a decision around that, that would be fantastic. All right, cool. Any other questions on that? We hope you guys will come and fill that thing out. We look forward to hanging with you guys. And if you have questions on it, as far as maybe you have to adjust your schedule or do whatever to get here, throw it at us and we'll do our best to answer. Cool. All right, so we're going to do 3 things today on the call. I'm actually sitting in the same room with Sharon, so she was probably the one that was echoing for a second, but she was good. We're gonna talk about this plastic plants thing that you guys have probably seen over the last 24 hours that we've been pushing around on Insta, but we're going to use it as kind of a tee up for the rest of our conversation today. Kay's going to share a little bit about some assessment work that he's done that kind of is potentially helpful for you guys, specifically in the area of staff and how do you know how to evaluate. It's a tool he's going to share with you guys on evaluating staff and how you can actually lean in to make sure that you're resourcing the staff development part and not just plastic planting on your staff. And then we're going to pivot really hard, and we're going to you're going to hear from Joseph. He's going to talk a little bit around assessing kind of your communication from the platform and in other ways to really look at what's the target of your communication, and is it hitting the target or is it not, and how do you evaluate some of those things and giving a great talk. So I'm gonna throw that to Joseph about halfway through the call today. As always, we're recording the call, so Tori has the recording going. I know I always screw it up, but she's got it. So we're recording the call. So sometime this afternoon or tomorrow, you will get this call's recording and any of the deck that is there. I want to have a conversation with you guys. So at some point, I'm going to ask you to unmute carefully and talk about this. Yesterday, I posted kind of just this kind of curious thing that happened to me a few weeks ago. My wife was out of town, and I was trying to be a good husband and take care of things, and messed it up pretty much gigantically. But one of the incidents that happened, and as all leadership people and communicators do, everything is a potential illustration. So I literally did this. This wasn't one of those pastoral illustrations that I made up. I literally watered about 10 plants in our house, 3 of which were actually plastic and were sitting by the sink. And so I poured a lot of water into them and moved on to the next. And it took about an hour before I came back around and really recognized that everything was running and there was water everywhere and the plants were actually plastic. But it occurred to me during that moment that it's sort of an analogy sometimes of the perspective that we can take as church leaders or nonprofit leaders in the worlds that we live in, that sometimes we don't really know what to do. We don't really know how to assess. We don't really know what direction. And part of our calls and what we do on a monthly basis is kind of all of us pause when we talk about working on it and kind of try to get honest a little bit around that, because all of you guys as leaders, I would assume, are doing watering. You're watering, you're trying to resource, you're trying to influence, you're trying to inspire. But the sense I got was when I was sitting there thinking about what an idiot I was, is I'm wondering too, if sometimes we don't do the same thing within our church organizations. If sometimes we don't spend a lot of time watering things that have no real potential, if we're honest and we assess it, they have no real potential for long-term growth or long-term impact in the direction that we want to go. I talked about it in the blog post around this idea of when it comes to watering plants, we either ignore it, right? We either ignore that, or we tend to live under a delusion of more. So what I mean by that is sometimes you guys have stuff in your organization, or you have staff people that you would call plastic plants. I know. Just go with it here for a second, all right? I want to hear from some of you. But the idea that, like, yeah, I feel like I've just been pouring into this person, or I feel like we've just been pouring into this initiative or this ministry or this direction, and nothing's really happening. And so right now your choice is really, you can just be delusional and you can just ignore it and just keep pouring it on and pretend that you're doing work, and everybody around you thinks that you're doing work, and everybody on your team kind of, it's like the emperor's new clothes. You just kind of all pretend, yeah, we're doing it, we're pouring it, it's going to grow. But you go back to your office, or you go back into real honest conversations, and you're like, this is no good, right? We also on the deck there, Kay, I also put some of these more things that we do, because sometimes our strategy is this idea of we can either ignore it or we can do more of it, right? So it's like, what if we do more? What if we just talk about it more? If we just talk about it more, it's going to grow. Or what if we just strategize more? We all love strategy. What if we just strategize more? What if we just focus on it more? What if we just meet about it more? All these kind of things. And in reality, the more is just really a delusion, similar to the temptation to ignore it. And so I was curious, as we're kind of here on this call, before we pivot a little bit, what are some plastic plants that you guys are dealing with in your particular context? Maybe we can turn this call and Zoom call into a confessional booth here for a moment. What are some plastic plants that you're dealing with that potentially you don't even have to solve it today, but you're under some conviction? Let's talk about it. Or some of the temptation, maybe historically you've dealt with some plastic plants and you've tried to do more or ignore, and how's that worked out for you? Let's hear from a few of you guys. Just unmute one at a time and just go for it.
Yeah, I'll dive in real quick. So we recently went away for a board meeting, and then took my lead team away, and we kind of came up with some vision for a new year, for a new season, and based around we're calling them 3 E's, encounter, equip, and I don't remember the third one. I should know it, but as that's happening, a church has approached us, and they want to merge with us.
It does.
And so now I'm like, oh crap, Lee, like I feel like suddenly the 3 E's are now a plastic plant, because now we really need to focus on this potential other merger and the changes that could bring. And so now I feel like I have a watering can in both hands going, okay, do I water both of these, or do I need to shelve one of them for a season? So I'm right in this right now.
What's the wrestling, Rob? I mean, I get the point of the wrestling, but now are you just like going, like we got to reset, or you just feel, is the temptation just to ignore it and keep moving?
The temptation, I guess, is I don't want to pour a bunch of water into this new initiative, this vision about these 3 E's that we're excited about, when the reality of working on a merger and going multi-church or multi-site is looming. And it's more of a where do I spend our energy right now? Because both are really exciting, but I'm not sure we can water them both at the same time and continue to do everything we're doing. So I guess, awesome. Ignore one and focus on the other, I guess, or yeah.
Yep. Love it. I mean, I don't love it for you, but I love that you're thinking about it. I love that you're analyzing it and kind of looking at it through that lens, right?
Yeah, thank
you. Okay, you want to put those, keep somebody unmute. Okay, if you go to the next slide, I'll just put them up there on the screen, and we'll just keep hearing from people. Keep going one more. Anybody else add to what Rob said?
I can contribute.
I heard somebody.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
This is Brandon.
Hey,
I've been new to senior pastoring for the last 8 months, and part of the culture of Hispanic churches is a lot of volunteerism and like fundraising, plate sales, just all kinds of stuff like that. But I've been having to put a kibosh on that, because I feel like there's a a lack of Christian education, you know, like discipleship going on. And so that's really caused a ripple, and we've lost some good people. But ultimately, like, I didn't feel like that was growing, you know, like that was just kind of a circular kind of revolving thing, but it only had limited um, progress, you know, associated with it.
So now you're having to you're having to do that now. Especially one of the things that's important. Brandon, I'll let Brandon talk to this, but I think sometimes the other Brandon, sorry, sometimes when you get into these things, I don't know if this will happen with you, Rob, but we have team members or we have some ownership level that actually is in denial around the plastic plant. Beard, do you want to talk about it with your team and what's been going on there? Brandon.
Sorry, boss. I'm in a car with
good.
a bunch of guys, so I'm just listening.
That's
in
all right.
today. I love you.
We can hear you. Talk a little bit for a second.
Well, I just was saying that, you know, see, these guys are gonna bash me.
Yeah. Brandon was talking about on the chat that they're watering some annual events that they feel like may need to go away because they are ineffective, right? So as you get into some of that,
he might not be able to say it out loud for the people who are actually in the car.
that's probably true,
No,
even though it's
these guys will just say something obnoxious they shouldn't say. Trust me, they're just gigging to me. I'm listening in.
All right. Anybody else want to comment on that? On the screen side, we've got kind of 5 deals that I talked about in the blog that you can read. Kay put it in there. But the idea of, you know, if you think you're dealing with plastic plants, to really risk a reality check, and I use the word risk because for some of you guys it can feel risky to kind of go, we need to really have some hard conversations around some of these things that we've been watering and resourcing. We may need to secondly reconsider some of our assumptions. If you think about the Todd Bollinger book, The Canoeing the Mountains, which is just amazing book. If you haven't read it, he really talks a lot about that, kind of reframing the question, not just answering it all the time in the same way. And some of you guys that are in more legacy type churches, like I'm thinking about Joel, I see Joel on there. We're going to be together in a couple months, like where there's some history there, where you have, when you're talking about watering stuff, you're talking about stuff that people have been pouring water on for a while. And so you're reconsidering some assumptions. Thirdly, I would say ask some hard questions around values. We've had a number of conversations on these think tank calls around values and aspirational versus actual. I think part of the way you kind of determine whether this is a plastic plant is if it's in direct conflict or violating the values that you believe are stated and or being lived out for your organization. So it's a plastic plant if it's like sitting over there and you're like, yeah, I'm watering this thing. I don't even know. It doesn't even match with what we're doing. Oh, there's the book. Rob has it right in front of him. If you can see Rob on your screen, it's a great read. You guys should grab it. But ask hard questions around values. The fourth thing is detect and adapt from a default thinking. So I think plastic plants can sometimes be there because they're default. Like we just default to that. Like that's just what we do, right? We want to have more people in groups. So we're going to run the freeway campaign, right? Or everybody's doing growth track. So we're just going to do growth track because it feels like everybody's doing it. So maybe we should, versus being able to really ask some hard questions, make some assumptions. And then finally, seek out some new perspectives through candid assessment, like really assessing whether that's you and your team, whether there's some methodology that you can use, some facilitated conversation you can have with your team. The word assessment is pretty important because it's not just you sitting alone in your thinking space, but it's really potentially opening yourself up to some outside outside influence. Hey, Joe V, talk about your comment in the chat. Some of us may be susceptible to that. So talk about that.
Yeah, man. You know, our church has gone through a lot of like major transition, and just give you guys a little context, like it was a demographic of like late 50s, early 60s, and now it's like about 33, 34 is our target demographic, and it's about the average age of our congregation. And so with that, it's gone through a whole lot of change. And part of that change was just the aesthetic, the overall look, the branding, the feel, the social media, the marketing, all that stuff. Make sure you have the right photos. And so, man, I just poured so much energy into making sure we had the right content and the right energy that we're putting out, or the right look and feel. And sometimes I feel like I just poured so much energy and so much time into that, where it's almost like diminishing returns, where I'm no longer as effective as I can be, because has become the obsession. And while I think that is an important piece of it, I think there's at some point, I'm watering a garden, and only half those plants are actually real plants. And so, what do I can actually take that water and use that elsewhere. And so I've just been wrestling through what that looks like, and pouring more energy into like our assimilation pathways, and some of our onboarding, and the front door and also the back door stuff. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at.
Was one of the challenges, Joe, because in reality you just kind of love that stuff?
Yeah, I think that's part of
Like,
it.
part of it was like selfish, like I just kind of love doing this stuff,
yeah.
and so I'm just going to keep watering away.
It's an easy win, man. It's like that dopamine, right? It's like, oh, cool, I got a dope video out, or I got a great graphic that's out, or our church looks really good. But at some point, it's like, you can have really great aesthetics, really great screen graphics, and really great social media presence. And I'm not saying that stuff isn't important.
Correct.
I'm saying that you have to be aware of what returns are you actually getting from it.
Right.
Like, are new guests actually looking at your social media? Or other Christians looking at your social media? Are like unchurched people wanting to see a viable social media presence? Or what is the thing that they're actually looking for? And so we began to ask the right questions and work on the right things rather than everything.
Yeah. I think I'm going to throw it to Kay here in a second, but I think one of the big things that I think is everybody should be pondering right now is kind of this, and this is a whole nother think tank conversation, is kind of this online streaming influence, etc. Right? Joseph just said, get sober. I think that's true. Like, unfortunately, I think some of us with our teams need to be, or maybe we've already had it, kind of some conversation around what is the role of online in our context, and what is the ROI of what we're doing there, and what is the expectation? Because I think that's a primary one right now that we could be watering because we think we're supposed to. But if we were honest and kind of pulled back the curtain, we would see what's happening there. It doesn't mean we should stop. It just means we may need to adjust the water. We may need to adjust, we may just need to adjust some things there when it comes to specifically, I would say online, kind of tagging onto what Joe was saying around branding and creativity and marketing and some of those things, whether they're actually producing what we want.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think the thing that we've learned is like we often default to it when it comes to the next generation, especially when it comes to Gen Z, millennials, or like they're looking for good marketing, good branding, and which is somewhat true, but I think they're looking for authenticity and intentionality. And I think that's something that the church has lacked. And if we're intentional and authentic with everything, I think that goes further than just being cool with everything. But that is a balance that I think every church has to ride, about what does intentional look like. And maybe your version of intentional is not to the highest standard that it needs. So
love it. Cool. One of the assessment things that we have to do when it comes to plants, plastic plants, has to do specifically with our staff, and the staff that we have, whether you're working with a smaller staff, or some of you on this call have an extensive staff, even some of you are spread out across multiple locations and you're trying to deal with staff. So I asked Kay, he had hit me a couple of days ago. I asked Kay because he's been doing some assessment, and I wanted him to just take a second and talk a little bit about how some assessment tools, very basic stuff that he's been using with some of the churches, is helpful in kind of identifying potentially some plastic plants within our team, and how do we need to be tackling helping them improve or helping them move along. So I'm going to throw it to Kay, and he can take the screen and walk you through what his thinking is around that.
Yeah, by the way, a lot of times lead guys, executive guys will say, hey, you have a talk for us for our next staff meeting or whatever it might be. And maybe your next staff meeting literally is putting a plastic plant in the middle of the room and then just having a conversation around it and just saying, hey, what are we watering? Because I think the reality is that we do have to have the sober reality that we do have a limited amount of water, even though sometimes we treat it like we have unlimited water. So, so I think that would be a good next staff meeting for you guys. All right. So one of the things I think, just shifting from that, but also in the same line is the staff piece. Sometimes we'll go in to a church or an organization and really be able to spend time with getting to know the staff. They're like, we just don't know. We would love an outsider perspective on our staff, where they're at, where their growth points are, and all those type of things and stuff. So, so one of the questions that I like to ask the staff is this: is a magic wand question. This is the question. The question is, if I had a magic wand, what's one thing that you would change? If you had a magic wand, what's one thing that you would change in the organization? If you had a magic wand, what's one thing you would change in the organization? And the reason why I like this question is because this is a work on it question, right? This is, okay, hey, getting outside, zooming out, and if you had one thing that you could change, what would that one thing be? And what's fascinating is that, again, if they have a magic wand that can change one thing, it's fascinating to hear what that one thing for each staff member is. Sometimes there's a lot of alignment and other times there's not. And it really does reveal the values of the organization or of that individual towards what they see, what they want, what they value, and those type of things. And so sometimes it's just a good question to be able to ask. I don't know if some of you guys do things like 15-5s or leader or other things where you have a rhythm and a cadence in your meetings to be able to ask these type of questions. Throw this in the mix here and there, to be able to ask them, because this could really help them, help you see what they value. So, just did this recently with the church, and these are some of the things: better internal communication. It seems like it's always a common one. Involvement in the decision process. Where are they in the, I wish I could change that. I would be more involved in decision making, or more inspiration for the staff, or a better understanding the vision, or how am I doing? A constant evaluation of how staff are doing, more specialized staff. So those were just some common things, or some things that just saw recently in a staff, but I do think that it's a great question to ask. Now, one of the things when we're talking about, let's say, for example, from a staff perspective, is how do we evaluate them? How do we know if we're watering a plastic plant, if you will, from a staff perspective? I really do like this framework from Brad Lomenick, H3 Leadership, Humble, Hungry, Hustle. You've probably heard of the Lancioni version of Hungry, Smart. This is a little bit different from that. And what I like about this is almost like a Venn diagram with these three, right? Like hungry, humble, hustle. And it's kind of written in this order: humble, hungry, hustle, in a specific way, to be able to say, when you think about your staff, there are people who have this humble characteristic. And that really is they know who they are. They're open about their realness. They're true to who they are. And yet they also know that it's not all about them, right? That's the humility part of all those things. They stick to their principles. They live out their calling. They are humble because they realize the role that they play within the organization and within, what God calls them to do. So that's the humble part. The hungry part is this, like, where am I going? This ambition, like, they're ready to charge the hill for what's next. They're ready to see what tomorrow looks like. They're so focused on, like, we can't stay here. We got to go towards somewhere where we aren't today. They are learners. They're passionate. They're innovative. They stay current, but then they're also challenging the future as well. So that's the hungry part. And then the third part would be the hustle. It's actually the execution part of things. People who are actually really good at finishing, and the excellence factor, and sticking to it, and team and partnership and all that type of stuff. So there's the hustle part. Now, when you think about an individual and a staff, there's certain qualities and certain things that you would say in staff A that has maybe hungry and but not necessarily the hunger and the hustle, right? And so one of the things that might be helpful for you is just to, quarterly, on a quarterly basis, to be able to just put something together like this, where you just got whiteboarded out or put it on a spreadsheet or whatever it might be, and then be able to red, yellow, green each staff member on a quarterly basis. So you really truly can examine where the gaps are for them. So for example, staff one, red, humble, hungry, green, green, hustle. You know these people, right? These people are like bulldozers. You know that they're going to get the work done. You know that they're going to charge the hill, but at the same time, their humility needs to be in check. They got a lot of pride and all this type of thing. You could probably already imagine somebody on your staff that fits that number one profile, right? Or staff number two, they're very humble, but they lack hunger and they are actually really lazy and they don't have any hustle in them, right? So you could probably think of another person on your staff that probably describes that as well. So all that to say, what would it look like to be able to spend some time evaluating your staff from this perspective? If you want to get an outside voice from somebody who you trust, do that as well, and or do this individually. What would that do to be able to really help you identify, are you truly watering a plastic plant or somebody who really wants to grow in these areas? Now, what you can do with these things once you do that is, number one, use a framework like this. H3 is great. Or maybe you have a common language of 4 C's, the character, competence, chemistry, culture. Do that. Or put your core values on there and say, all right, if these are our core values and we want all of our staff to be living those core values, then how would we rank them? Would we do green, yellow, red? And you would say maybe some of these staff are not doing so well in some of these areas. And so you would do this, but do this in your hiring. We do a good job in using these things in hiring, but maybe not so much in continually evaluating on a constant basis. And we would recommend maybe on a quarterly basis. So that's the first thing. Secondarily, once then you've identified the yellows and reds, this is a prime time. This is a great example to be able to put a customized staff development plan towards helping them grow in those greatest gaps. You can use your one-on-ones, you can use your coaching, you can use your staff development to say, hey, there's a gap. And by the way, the book H3 breaks all 3 of those down into about like 5 to 7 different habits. So if you got a staff that's lacking in a certain area, maybe they just hone in on a couple of those chapters and be able to work on that, and then you revisit those in the coming months. So this is a great way that we can customize a staff development plan towards those individuals. And then the last thing is that if you've got reds, first of all, you wouldn't have hired them in the first place. So why are we okay with keeping them in those categories, in those reds? So we have to have some immediate action towards some crucial conversations, keep them accountable towards a timeline. And then if they don't follow through that, we wouldn't have hired them as a red. Why would we keep them as a red? And we have to make some difficult decisions around that. So this is just an example of just one framework or any framework that you can come up with to be able to get a healthy rhythm in evaluating your staff. Comments, questions, thoughts?
Yeah,
I have a couple
feedback,
questions.
please.
Kay, in your experience with the magic word question, first of all,
Yeah.
Is that better to be done in a staff meeting, or is that better to be done individual? Because it's similar to that, when you use that quadrant of like what's working, what's not working, your staff are afraid to say what's not working because it indicts specific staff members. So you don't get true honesty in a group setting like that.
Yeah.
So do you find that better to be done individually or anonymously or in a group staff meeting?
Yeah, you answered the question right there, Chris. It definitely is an individual thing. And it's truly in the context of asking for great feedback, right? So it's got to be set up well. And that's why sometimes an outside voice, that you trust is sometimes even helpful. It's interesting because sometimes we'll go into a church or organization and we'll ask questions like this, and they know that this report or this information is going to go back, and yet at the same time, they still offer that feedback, even though they wouldn't have done it in a group setting, like you say, Chris. And so that's where it's like, use creative ways to be able to do this. But then if you start building it into the culture and you start using this on a routine basis, I think people get a little bit more honest around that, and they get permission to be able to say that. So yeah, I think it's more of an individual exercise for sure.
Cool, thank you.
Anybody else? Feedback? This is an open forum. Go for it. This gold stuff.
Jeremiah, tell me a little bit about what you commented there.
That's just worth the price of admission right there. Because when you think about it, you know that intuitively, but you need
Yeah.
somebody to kind of smack you upside the head with it sometimes. You wouldn't have hired them as a red, so why do you settle for keeping them as a red? And I think sometimes just because it's more work, but at the end of the day, it's not worth it. So
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely.
if any of you guys have ever read Powerful by Patty McCord, the Netflix HR gal, it's not apples to apples with what Kay's doing here. But the one thing that I got out of that read was she is, as a huge HR person, she is not a massive fan of performance. What do you call them? Performance plans. Like she just is like, you end up spending as the supervisor more time working a performance plan with someone like that probably isn't going to work out. So I'm not advocating don't do performance plans, but she, as someone very experienced, says if you get to the point where someone needs a performance plan, you probably already know the writings on the wall. And so go ahead and do it if you want, she says, but you're going to spend the next 3 months grinding to try to get them where they're supposed to be. In some ways, she would say the performance plan is like watering a plastic plant.
Yeah, and I would, Leah, I would agree and disagree in the sense, I don't know what the context of that
No,
was.
you can't disagree.
But from this perspective, I don't think that we have owned it ourselves. We've allowed it. And
Fair.
so we have to do our part to be able to own it and to be able to help develop them. Because the reality is I think we've allowed this to happen and even almost like they've gotten this pass, like somebody who's not humble but has hunger and hustle, it almost like over counters and then we excuse the humble part and we allow them to be read. And so that's really on us as leaders to be able to manage that and to be hold the organization accountable towards that. So I would say yes, that, but at the same time, that's why one of the things we just said was keep it accountable towards a timeline, and ultimately if you through that timeline you need to release them, you got to release them, because yes, it will be like watering a plastic plant.
Right. In some ways, it's the development plan that should have come sooner before we get to that point, right?
Absolutely.
Can't believe you disagreed with me. It's embarrassing in front of all these people.
If I can maybe add to that conversation, I think for small church situations, firing is so much more difficult because it impacts the community in so much. In large churches, the staff maybe don't have as much connection with the broader scope of the community. And I think that's a tension that a lot of pastors feel. Like, you can keep someone on staff that's a red on 2 of those 3, but man, she's got so much influence in the community. That you're going to absorb an enormous amount of pain if you fire her because she's just not doing well. You know what I'm saying? And so I think in the church, because we're so community oriented and relational oriented, it becomes a really difficult tension for a lot of pastors. And I think things like this help give us evaluation tools to properly make healthier decisions. So yeah.
One thing that I'll say, Chris, that reminded me of what you were talking about, that is that when we turn up the fire towards this and actually start addressing some of this stuff, they're the one that actually hits the eject button. They're the ones that say, you know what, I'm out because I don't want to work on that, or whatever it might be. And I think sometimes that's necessary and needed. And I would say that that's what development plans do a lot of times. That's what, keeping a track record of, and really working a plan towards those types of things. Not to say that we want them to leave, but if they're not going to be willing to grow in those areas, then it is best for the organization. So I would say the difference between a red and a difference between a yellow is you can tolerate a yellow because there's still hope there, and you're seeing some. When you see a red, it cannot last for too long, because ultimately that's going to damage the organization and what you're trying to accomplish. So yeah, I love those thoughts, Chris.
One of the big challenges that I've had in the past with a larger team is the people that are green, they see the red as well. So if you, as the primary leader, don't deal with the red, eventually it starts to reflect more on you than it does actually on the individual, because the other people are going, I'm performing, why is Lee not dealing with the underperformer or the problematic person on the team? So just be aware that if you ignore the red, and just keep watering it. Eventually, some of that's going to actually come back on you. And I think the smaller church thing is important too, because I think that the dynamics, and this is a whole other conversation around even trying to hire staff, probably makes you hang on longer, Chris, I would think, a little bit, unfortunately, because you just know it's not like you've got this pool of people that are going to come in. So you tend to probably stretch a little longer when you feel like, can I even replace or do anything with the staff? So. Cool. All right, we're going to throw it to Barkley, give him 10 minutes or so. He's going to pivot hard. So keep moving into the chat. But part of our conversation is really around this plastic plant idea is kind of the theme underlying today. And so we wanted to hit kind of some basic ideas of what those can be, specifically around staff. And then I think Joe's going to share just some things around communication. Some of you guys are lead guys on this call, or XPs. You're doing things on stage, whether you're communicating the message or you're doing other secondary things on stage. One of the things we've been looking at as well is assessing churches and kind of reminding churches as far as language and how language impacts us being on mission. So I'm going to hand it off to him and let him share a little bit around some of the learnings that he has before we wrap the call up. Joseph, take it away, bud.
Right on. Here we go. Let's see if sharing screen works. So nervous.
Come on, bro.
All
You
of you
got
watching
this.
me handle
I
my
messed up
tech.
this Zoom
Do y'all
call,
see
so you
the
can be-
orange slide, Anatomy of a Great Talk? No?
We do not see anything. There it is. Keep pulling, keep dragging. There it is. That's
Is that it? You
perfect.
see it?
Yep,
Great.
perfect.
So when I was 16 years old, they let you bring these to school. And so I took advantage of it. This is a samurai sword. This will slice my finger off. I took advantage of that because I was in the speech class, and it was one of the first speeches I ever gave. And we had to speak about some moment in history, and I really geeked out on feudal Japan and the samurai culture. And so in my mind, I prepared the speech at home, and I thought, man, wouldn't it be captivating to open my speech? I'll hide the sword so nobody could see it. And then in this dramatic move, I'll pull this sword out, shock everybody in the front row, and then I'll go into my speech, in feudal Japan, 300 years ago, ... Well, then I get to the moment of truth. I'm in front of the class, and the girl that I like, Shannon Biber, she's sitting in the second row, and I chicken out. So instead of creating this dramatic moment, and I'm not over dramatizing this, I pulled this sword out from, and again, I did a good job of hiding the thing so nobody saw it. And instead of this huge gesture, I just went slice. So feudal Japan was 300 years ago in samurai, and I just closed in on myself, and I actually elicited laughter from the room, but not with me because I was not telling a joke, but at me. So I created a captivating moment, but it wasn't the one that I wanted. Today, what I want to talk about just for a couple of minutes is what the anatomy of a great talk really looks like. And, with a call packed full of this much talent, excellence, experience, I imagine there are so many of you who are better communicators than I am. So I'm not necessarily suggesting that you need help with your communication, but instead what I want to give you is a tool to evaluate all public communication that is meant to persuade people. And we've had different models for this, and in your context, you might have different values and different approaches to this. But I find a lot of times we fail to refine our public communication because the standards of it are a little abstract, nebulous, maybe even confusing. We have to obey 10 different rules, or, a lot of times we just let it go. And I find this particularly true when we have to communicate things that are complicated. When I see this a lot in our worship leaders who are trying to communicate or connect or invite people to participate in extremely big ideas in a big moment, but struggle to know how to draw them in a way that would persuade action. So this is a grid through which I would encourage you to evaluate, empower, raise up, refine all communication that you make on social media, anything that's meant to persuade people, announcements, even if you have to give a wedding toast, just spur of the moment, somebody hands you the microphone and you have to honor somebody publicly. I think every single opportunity that we communicate is a chance to change a life. And that's why I think this is important and why I always want to be growing in this. Every time we communicate publicly, it's a chance to expand our thinking, change minds, call to action, develop intimacy with people. And quite frankly, I probably agree with a lot of us here that I believe in the power of the spoken word. I won't give us a Bible lesson or a Greek lesson, but logos is a powerful concept that really communicated a lot of different things, but it communicated the full effect of someone's existence. To call Christ the logos is to say, this is God's existence, in fact, expressed to us. And I think the spoken logos, the spoken word, has the power to change someone's existence, to change their thinking, to reveal something about you or about your mission or about your vision in a way that activates people. So that's why it's so important for us to continue to increase the quality, the effectiveness of what we're communicating publicly. I do want to add one thing before I get into the simple framework, and that is this. It's been my experience as I've consulted a lot of different contexts, for-profit, nonprofit spaces in public communication over the last 5 years, is that when I've coached people in public communication, people will nod their heads. You might even experience that on the Zoom call today, and sort of tune this out as I totally get it, like we're already doing that. And then I will hear their next talk, and they create so many obstacles to the people who need what they have to say the most. And I think a lot of those obstacles can be obliterated if we would apply this simple framework. I believe that the three key elements of a great talk are really simple. Number one, it's what you want to say, like what's the thing we're trying to communicate. Number two, why it matters. And then number three, how can I use this? I would love for somebody to unmute themselves and take a stab at what you believe would be the most effective order of these elements in a great, effective public communication. Anybody want to take a stab at it?
We're too afraid to unmute, Joseph. We're too afraid. We're intimidated now.
It's okay. Anybody?
Why, what, how?
Love it. Great. You get the prize. I think the most effective framework is why, what, and how. Every time somebody has a microphone, every social media post that you give, I would say that even with every sermon that some of you are going to be delivering, every announcement, every time you have to give a toast or honor somebody at a staff meeting or a leadership summit, why, what, how is the framework of every great talk. Even if you're using like the Andy Stanley, me, you, God, you, we, I still think that fits within a why, what, how framework. So let me just briefly explain what these are so that you're empowered to evaluate your own public communication, but then also the communication of the people on your teams. First of all, why? I think the goal of the first few moments, not minutes, but the first few moments of every great talk is to make people feel like they made the right decision listening to you. Why answers the question, quite frankly, why should I pay any attention at all to what this person is about to say? Why should I pay any attention to what this person is about to say at all? I think that every person that's listening to you or reading your social post or whatever are secondarily asking, can I trust this person? Can I trust this person to give me the thing that I need? But I actually believe now, and there's some studies that would indicate that that's a trailing question. The real question that people are asking, even subconsciously, is like, what's in it for me? Like, what benefit do I have to listening to this person for any length of time? Can you help me? Can you improve my life? Can you reduce pain or stress? And some of the hacks that I've experienced in here that might be helpful for you in your context is I really believe that you should not squander the first 30 seconds of any talk with something like, thanks, or it's such an honor to be here, or hey, how's everybody doing, which generally serve the speaker to help us kind of emotionally downshift into the moment of, quote, performing, but it's not effective as a way of compelling people to listen, to be curious. It has nothing to do with them, even though the question seems like it's disarming, it's affable. So I think instead a strong statement right up front, something ear-catching, a question that teases out the benefit that the talk is going to, or the announcement is going to give people, like, hey, what if I could exponentially improve your chances of getting a date? That'd be an interesting way to start a talk.
Yeah, Joseph, can
have
you
you
talk
ever-
to the point? I'm going to interrupt you. I'm going to interrupt you for a second.
Please.
Can you speak to like the context that some of these guys are in, where they're either doing or coaching? Maybe not a complete message, though. About half of these guys are doing that on a regular basis. But typically, the harder, like we talk about, even at the crossing, the hardest 4 minutes at the crossing on a Sunday gathering is the person who has to get up and host. And how is that
Yeah.
compelling? And how does it not just bring the whole room down? How does it stay on, and so again, watering, not to go back to our theme today, but like we just keep doing the host moment, rattling off 3 announcements and, trying to get through it, make it compelling. Any thoughts? I know you've got 2 or 3 more points there, but any thoughts on that, or other guys may want to jump in on how this bridge that gap for me? Like, how would you approach that with that 3-minute slot?
Well, I find that generally what you have to communicate is already a foregone conclusion. Like, we have to communicate that there's a starting point class starting this Sunday afternoon. Okay, that's the what. Why? Why should anybody pay attention to that announcement? And that might be very clear to you or to the host, like, well, gosh, this is a place where people who are exploring the faith or getting started in the faith can ask the questions they didn't think they were allowed to ask. Start with that. It doesn't have to be something crazy and creative. You'd be like, hey, you might be here and you're wondering, where can I ask the questions that I didn't think I was allowed to ask in church? Well, let me tell you where you can go. 1 o'clock today, and this room is starting point. So it doesn't have to be this big exhaustive thing, but just starting with why is the what going to benefit the people that it's meant to reach, to impact? That help
Matt
answer the
Warren,
question?
Matt Warren was on the call. He had to jump off, but he actually was visiting the crossing within the last couple months, and he was sitting in the crowd, and I was the guy giving announcements, and he actually cornered me after the service. I'm like, bro, you're just here visiting. I don't need your input. But he was like, it's funny when you were up there, because it felt like a lot of what you were saying was sort of like, here's what we need you to do versus here's what we have that actually is meeting a need that you might have or answering a question that you might be asking. So he kind of got in my face, and he was doing it in a way that was helpful, because it was the same response or call to action is what I was looking for, but it was just him questioning what's the way in which I was doing that, right? Versus it being, this is about us, we need you to do this, versus here's what's going on with you, and here's what we want to offer to you. It's slight semantically, but I think to make that moment compelling, that's important. So I got called out. So there you go.
This is an orientation. It's not a destination. It's something I'm constantly revisiting with my own talks, and I speak publicly a lot. And the challenge I right now have is, can I do it in 1 sentence? Can I compel them to be curious in 1 sentence? Because that's what they're used to. That is TikTok, that is YouTube, that is TED Talks, and like it or not, debate it or not, that is what they're used to. And if you can serve them, and by the way, introduce yourself later, give them context later, that can happen downstream. I find it's jarring. I've spoken in some of your contexts before, some of your churches, and people will be like, gosh, I didn't know if you're going to introduce yourself, but they remember the first thing I said, or the first story I told, or the first question I asked. And that was more important than me, even when I'm a guest. And I get to it for sure. But I'm not making this up. This is stuff as I've studied sociology of education. Usually if we can start with, this is the benefit, or this is why you should pay attention. Powerful step. I want to have integrity.
Joseph, we got like 2 minutes. So just, you're good.
Well, you asked a question.
I know, I was trying to stir it up. Sorry.
Okay, so here we go. Next thing real quick is what. This is the part you probably have less of a confusion around. What is your time teaching or illuminating or announcing? Like, what is it that you're trying to communicate? And I would challenge everybody to try and express that in 1 sentence. Yes, distill your sermon in 1 sentence. It doesn't have to be a sticky statement. If you're not into that, that's fine. But just expressing it in 1 sentence. Let me give you a few examples of this, and then we'll move on to the third step to empower you. The essence of your message is, it could be, or your communication. I'm teaching 100 of our closest friends which formative moments shaped my daughter's beautiful personality. I might say that at a wedding toast. I'm teaching my employees why they should feel proud about last year's results and excited about next year's goals. That's the what I'm trying to communicate. I'm giving people new techniques to apply at work or to improve their personal well-being. That's 1 sentence that distills it into the what. What is it that you're trying to communicate? Make sure that doesn't get obscured with all of the, the joking and the, the extra words that we throw in there sometimes. Okay, last point real quick is how. And how is really, really important. I think this is the biggest piece of any good speech, and it's the hardest to pull off. It can often be the most ambiguous. How am I supposed to do anything with what you've just told me? And I think even more to the point, the question that we can answer is, how can I do what I want to do? This is very hard, but I think worth the extra effort. People are only going to do what they want to do. So after you've shared your what, and this is what God wants for your life, to be able to introduce it in a way that feels like I want to take that step, or I want that vision, I want what could come as a result of choosing this. How can I empower them to do what they want to do? Jesus asks all the time, what do you want? What do you want? What do you want? A couple real quick hacks on this, and then I'm done. First, I love to pause and interact. Slow down the announcement or the sermon or the whatever, and there might be a point for interaction there, depending on the size of the group. So people engage in the content. Second thing here is something doable, not just something interesting. I'm speaking to a lot of my fellow preachers out there that we just love all the abstract meaning of the things that we've been studying for 15 hours that week. Do not land in the abstraction, land in the practical. Give them something. I think it's stop short of loving them if we don't empower them to do something with the idea. And then the last piece here is to keep it conversational. This is where you can say like, hey, I'm in this too. Here's why this is important to me. I can't tell you the meaning this has created in my life. Depending on size of a group, this would be a great time for Q&A if that's the context that you're in, or other people participating in the idea. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Why, what, how is a great framework to help improve every public communication. So I hope that was helpful for you. You're muted, Lee.
Yeah. I don't know if you guys are having to have conversations with your team or you yourself personally, but I think, again, this deck will go out. And so this stuff that Joseph's sharing can be contextualized into where you need to be at whatever level you're communicating. Because again, I know some of us were kind of putting up with, different levels of communication, but man, it's valuable space when we have people's ears. And so I think even looping around to these reminders, this good stuff, these reminders that he has today around, how we can coach and or personally be more effective at what we're doing. So Joseph, thanks, bro. That was some stuff to put together, and I didn't give you a ton of time, so I apologize, but you did great. So there you go. It was great. It was a great talk. So there you go. Why, how, what? We got it. Cool. So just to review, you guys, in the deck, we've got some real questions around putting the plant in front of your team and maybe having those conversations in the next week or two. You also got Kay's assessment stuff based on the green, yellow, red, humble, hustle, and hungry. And then you're also going to get the stuff that Joseph just walked us through very quickly on effective communication tool. And as well, you'll get that Think Tank Live information that's on there. We'll stick it in the chat again one more time. I think a couple of you actually registered today. So we still have a couple more spots. Would love to have you guys again be part of it. All right. Hey, you guys are awesome. One of the things that we would love to do is just continue to get you guys to invite others to be on the call. So if you have people that you want on the call, there's actually a form. If Kay puts it in the chat, it's going to go away in like 2 seconds. But there's actually a form. Kay, maybe you can speak to it. That's easy. I mean, obviously, if you email us, we can get them added. But there's actually a really easy form that they fill out that gets them on the email invite list. So if you have people that are lead guys, XPs that are in that role, that you say, man, these calls once a month would be beneficial. Love to get them to network. We'd love to add them. We just need to get their information and they'll get that same call. We keep so many people on the list because a lot of people want to get the information, even if the call time, this 11 a.m. Pacific, does not work for them. All right. So appreciate you guys so much. Again, the recording will go out along with the deck and any kind of follow-up you need. We're all here for it. Okay. Cool. Okay. Anything to wrap up? Any closing words? The why, the how, the what? That's it.
Lead well. Work on it.
All right, guys. See ya.